Hello, this is Faith at Faith and Books, and I thought I would just give a quick review of the book I finished a couple days ago called Kindred by Octavia. Is it E. Butler? She's got a middle initial, but Octavia Butler. And this was a book that I'd been looking forward to reading, and finally got to. I heard about it a few months ago, I guess, or maybe a year ago, not sure. But anyway, I'd been looking forward to reading it. And it's by, well, I said who it's by, but it's about this young married woman. I don't know, maybe she's 30. I'm not sure. Her name's Dana, and it's the year's 1976, and she's married to a white guy named Kevin, and they're living in Los Angeles. And somehow, when we never learn how, we never learn why, she suddenly gets transported back to 1815 Maryland during the days of slavery, and this is where her ancestors were from. And so she keeps going back and forth in time, and the way time passes in present day as opposed to the past when she travels back to it is different. She'll only be gone a few minutes or a few hours in 1976, but when she's back in time, she's there for a lot longer. She's there for months, and that's never explained. So there's a lot of the book just doesn't explain things. It just accepts you. It just expects you to accept these kind of, absurd premises, or they just aren't explained. So anyways, that was the premise, and that's a really intriguing premise, and I do think the author got her point across. I think it's a didactic novel, and she just wanted the reader to go through this thought experiment or this experience of what it must be like, or what it would have been like to be thrust into this time period where you have no recourse, you have no redress for any wrongs, you are at the mercy of brutal overlords just by virtue of the color of your skin. And so it really accomplished that, and the action was fast. So it only took me 2 nights to read the book. And it was really kind of blood-curdling. I actually had a nightmare each night that from falling asleep reading the book. So in that way, it was really riveting, and the action was fast. I didn't understand why there were certain plot elements, because it never got tied up. These different elements never got. It wasn't very satisfying. I don't know why she made some choices that she made. So I gave it 3 stars. And I used to not, before BookTube, I didn't do stars. But there was a tag a while ago that asked about, how do you decide how many stars you give a book? So I've decided when I give 5 stars, it means it's absolutely brilliant. If I give 4, it means I'll recommend it. And 3 is I have mixed feelings, and this is a 3. But I would have given it 3.5 because I will admit that, it was quite riveting and action-packed, and it moved along, and it did, I think, what the author wanted it to do, which is, really bring home what a terrible system slavery was and how unfair and dehumanizing and frightening it was. So yeah, I think she accomplished all that. I felt like it was very underdeveloped. Like I feel like she just did like a first draft of the plot, and then she just put in enough details so that it would make sense, at the lowest level make sense. And like, if there was something that she had to put in a detail about something, but she hadn't given us any background for it, she would just sort of awkwardly throw in, because I knew this because I had happened to read a magazine or an article or something about it. Like she would just throw it into, it felt kind of amateurish to me. And she does some I thought really awkward history dumping in through dialogue. Her dialogue, The book is plot and dialogue, and the dialogue, to me, never got above clunky. I mean, it's just clunky wooden dialogue for the most part. I didn't feel like there was much character development. We were sort of told about relationships rather than experiencing them. I felt like everyone sort of talked the same. I really felt like it was a rough draft, and then she decided it was okay, and she was just going to go with it. And I think it could have been so much more. It could have been better written. It's written in a very, when I started reading it, I thought it was a middle grade novel because the language was simple. And it's like she's just she's making a report of something bizarre that happened to her. But she's not being especially eloquent about it. She's just telling you. She's just relating the facts to you. And there's very little description, just enough description to get by, but not enough, I didn't think. And they were just, and I could, like I said before when I was talking about it, I was coming off of reading a Victorian novel, and then I'm reading the brothers Karamazov. And so they really do language well, and it's very rich. And so it was kind of jarring to open this book and start reading this very simple language, yet very, very violent, and a lot of language and very, tense, violent situations. So, it's not for middle grade. It's not for a middle grade audience, and yet it's written at that level. So maybe I read it at the wrong time, and maybe if I'd read it in a different time, I would have been more enthusiastic about it, but I just felt kind of disappointed. And the other thing that really disappointed me about it was, there were several things, but one was that I happened to know the area in Maryland where she, supposedly went back to. And I don't know it that well, but it's not that far from where I am, and you drive through that area if you're going to the Maryland or Delaware beaches. So it's sort of like part of my childhood was driving through that area. And, every once in a while we'd go on a family picnic out there, or there'd be some sort of seafood festival or something like that. And then 4 years ago, my husband and I actually got won a weekend in the middle of winter at the St. Michael's Inn, which is right near the area where she's talking about. She's talking about a plantation outside of Easton, Maryland. St. Michael's isn't very far from Easton. So, and it's right on the water. And they have a wonderful, it's this tiny little town, but they've preserved all the old buildings, and they have a wonderful maritime museum. And that was and I learned a lot of history of that area. In fact, we saw Frederick Douglass's sister's, and I wish I could remember her name, cabin where she lived. You can see that. Anyway, so the thing is, in the book, I don't think they ever mention, she never mentions the word Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay in that area was the prime income for many people. So all the fishing and the oysters, the crabs, it's a huge maritime area, and boat building. Everyone has boats there, and there's so much shoreline. It's like a really zigzaggy coastline. There's so much shoreline. There's so many rivers and swamps and marshes and streams and just coast along the shore on the Chesapeake Bay. The whole area is dominated by fishing, the fishing industry, and that's never mentioned once. One time she talks about somebody had to take a steamship to Baltimore. But she never mentions, I don't think she ever says Chesapeake Bay. She never mentions anything of the maritime culture there. And it's everywhere. So that, it didn't feel real to me. But the other thing was, they're on this plantation, right? And the reason why southern Maryland and the eastern shore, even though Maryland stayed in the Union, there were a lot of people that were really sympathetic to the South, and it was because of their tobacco plantations. That was their cash crop. and that they needed the slaves for that. Or, they thought they needed the slaves for that. They needed cheap labor for the tobacco plantations. She never mentions that. They're on a plantation. I think she talks about one other plantation. She mentions corn and wheat. She never mentions tobacco. I don't think the word tobacco is once in the book. Nobody smokes a pipe. Nobody chews tobacco. I mean, she doesn't talk about anybody shipping tobacco. Nothing. So, I mean, reading the whole book, it felt very generic. It didn't feel like she had done any research about what life might have been like in 1815 in Maryland. It just didn't feel real. And then at the end of the book, they have this whole, like, one of those book club, what do you call it, addendums or whatever, where they have questions. And one of the things said that she did meticulous historical research. No, she didn't. I mean, it didn't feel meticulous to me and not to that place. She does do this really awkward fact dumping where she talks about Frederick Douglass, who was born in that county, Talbot County, and she talks about Harriet Tubman. I mean, one line. One line mentions Frederick Douglass, one line mentions Harriet Tubman, and she mentions a couple other people, but it was, something you would find in a short, back in those days, in 1976, you'd go to an encyclopedia, and read an article. And I mean, I didn't feel like it was that well researched. So there was no sense of place. There was no sense of historical place. If I was writing a story where I was going back in time, I'd be interested in recreating that time period. But I think she was truly only interested in talking about slavery. So she didn't bother with the other stuff. Whereas probably I'm coming from a different perspective. I would want to talk about slavery because that's an important lesson, but I would want to do it in a richer context, Also, the other thing is, and it's because I don't know science fiction very much, but I really thought science fiction was about like futuristic stuff and, dealing with science and technology of the future, like imagining that. This is called the first book written by a Black woman that's science fiction, but all it is she travels back in time. So there's no development of any theory about why this happens. Like if she had been like, I don't know, somehow she'd been doing something where she'd disturbed the space-time continuum or something like that, and then that had thrust back, that would have felt more science fiction-y to me. But to me, this was like, I don't know, it just felt like a fairy tale, or like if a genie had decided to whisk you back in time or something. It didn't feel very science fiction-y to me. So I wish she'd developed that aspect of the story more. I wish we knew why this was happening to her. Why was it happening to her just with this one? She had this one great-great-great-grandfather who somehow had this psychic connection, which is never explained, and he could summon her when he needed his life saved. But why didn't it happen with any other ancestor? Why just this particular one? It was never explained. If I were writing the story, I think I would have wanted to do, not only would I have developed the science fiction aspect of it more, but I think I would have had what if somehow she had the superpower and she had to go back, right, and save all her ancestors, right, to make sure that they lived so that she could live, but so that she would have been born. And then you could have journeyed through history, right? You could have started at one point and then moved up through, maybe during the Civil War, and then maybe post-war Reconstruction or whatever, and maybe migrating to Chicago or something. Like, she could have gone through the whole history of African Americans. Like, maybe I'm thinking of Roots or something like that. But she didn't want to do that, and that's okay. But maybe that would have made more sense, that somehow she had this superpower, and in some way. And she went back and she had to do this for all her. I just didn't understand why it was just this one. I just didn't get it. The other thing I missed is that I thought that there would be maybe more about the Black church and just how, because I always think that, and there's even a PBS show, The Black Church, that I watched the first half. I think there's the second half was on last night, but we recorded it and I'm going to watch it maybe tonight. We actually watched Lincoln last night, which was interesting. But anyway, she just gave like the most cursory, she just touched on the church in the most cursory way. Like, and really like, so, I mean, that's something that's so powerful and beautiful that came, like, that showed the resilience and the creativity, of the whole Black culture. And so why was that just brushed over? I would have wanted to elaborate on it more, but it wasn't. I just feel like the whole book could have been developed more. And she had a very didactic reason for writing it, and she wasn't going to put any more into it than she had to get that point across. And so I feel the actual storytelling suffered. Like, it could have been so much more, and I found it disappointing, even as it scared me. So I gave it 3.5 stars because I did think she had accomplished what she wanted to, and it was riveting, and it did freak me out. But I don't think I'm going to be searching out Octavia Butler books in the future. So anyway, so that's my impression of Kindred. I'm a little disappointed. I really was looking forward to reading it, and I mean, I'm glad I read it. It was a good experience, and now I know more, right? But it disappointed me a lot too. So yeah. Anyway, all right. So that's it for me, and I'll be back later this week. I just got this few moments to make a video, so I took advantage of it. But so I guess that's it. So I hope you're well, and happy reading. Bye.